Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you to Yossi Pugach, who was not with us last week. His mother, Zichrona Livracha, passed away. So we want to wish him every nechama and bracha, should have long life and only besarot tovot. I want to just say, I know that we had announced that this year was going to be on the enigma of Esav, villain or victim. And then I realized that we had done that last year. It is available on YouTube. By the way, all of these are available on YouTube, BKOA YouTube. That's the initials of Beit Knesset Ohelari, because we're using the Ohelari Zoom room. So you can access all of these videos. If you're not sure how to do it, just send me an email and I will send the link to you. Last week, we talked about Leah, and I must say, without Yossi's professional help, unfortunately, we do not have that recorded. It was a great shiur, but maybe someday we'll do it again. And we learned about Leah. Tonight, we're going to talk, I think, about one of the most overlooked but fascinating personalities of the Torah, and that is Dina. We have seen over and over again that there is a kind of common theme between the great women of the Torah. They lead brilliant but tragic lives. This is a consistent theme. Sarah, for example, she waits 90 years to have a child and greatly distresses over it. She's kidnapped twice. She dies right after the Akedah. Rivka has a troubled relationship with her husband Yitzchak. She essentially loses both of her sons. Yaakov is separated from her after the incident of the birthright. She'll never see Yaakov again. And Esav, of course, is estranged from her. Rachel, we know, dies young in childbirth. Leah, as we discussed last week, she feels that her marriage is loveless, that she is scorned. The Torah even says that she's hated, and even her death is not recorded or hinted at in any way in the Torah. But then there is Dina, and she may be an even more tragic figure than all of these other women that we have mentioned. For starters, her story is the only incident of sexual abuse explicitly recorded in the Torah. And as I think we're going to see tonight, that for many reasons, her story is very, very topical considering what is happening in the world today, specifically regarding women. Well, the most central episode involving Dina is one that we're all familiar with. Dina becomes somewhat too chummy with the locals. The pasuk says, "Vatetse Dina," and Dina went out. And Shechem kidnaps and rapes her. This is a serious offense. It's cruel, actually. The Medrash says that she was lured out of her tent. She was with the girls. Someone even suggests she was teaching monotheism to the women, to the girls, and somehow he was able to lure her away. They have, Rashi says, both natural and unnatural sexual relations. And then Shechem petitions Yaakov to marry her and makes this proposal, which, of course, we would find very odious, kind of insult to injury, where he says, we'll intermarry together between the two peoples and you will assimilate into us. Obviously, nothing that interested Yaakov and the Shvatim, the tribes. So, of course, the brothers cannot agree to this. Led by Shimon and Levi, they massacre the town and they rescue their sister Dina. In the PARSHA sheet of this week, I talk about the whole subject of did they commit murder? Were they justified to do what they did or not? And I think clearly we would, well, there are actually many, many opinions as to what they did, whether it was right, whether it was wrong. But we can read that about that, but suffice it to say that most people, most of the authorities say that they really didn't do anything that they shouldn't have done. In any case, Yaakov, the brothers have this plan. They make them undergo Brit Milah, and ultimately they are able to win back Dina. Yaakov does not agree with this plan, but it's really only how it's carried out more than anything else that he objects to. He just, for various reasons. He says it's because, well, it's going to make it very difficult for him to get along with his neighbors. But much more than that, I think it's this sense of his being very, very self-conscious about being known as someone who who operates through subterfuge, and ultimately he questions whether or not, he is an honest person, a fair person, more than anything else. But at the end of the day, the brothers say to him, "Shall we treat our sister as a prostitute?" And that seems to carry the day. The Medrash says that Dina has a child with Shem. Some say that she had a daughter, and this is Osnat, who will ultimately marry Yosef much later on in the story, which is fascinating, of course, because as we'll discuss in a few moments, had Dina been a boy, she would have actually been Yosef. But I'll leave you to think about that for a moment. But we'll talk about that more in a bit. But who will marry Dina? She feels that she is shunned by the community because of what's happened. She is even called a Canaanite, which obviously is meant as a slur, as a pejorative term. The pasuk in Vayigash says that that she is identified because of this particular act of being a Canaanite, and she is listed that way because she was impregnated by a Canaanite. So her brother Shimon actually agrees to marry her. Now, of course, you're going to say, how can she marry her brother? Well, this is a medrash, but she feels that she is so humiliated by what happened to her that she really doesn't have any options. She's not going to even go outside till Shimon has pity on her and marries her. There is that issue of sometimes incest. The Torah even refers to it sometimes as a chesed, even though that's hard for us to understand. Others say that she didn't have a girl, she didn't have a daughter, she had a boy, a son named Shaul, who becomes part of Shimon's inheritance. Then there's another opinion that says that she married Job. But if we accept Rashi, who says that she married Shimon, one of the kind of weird conclusions of that is that Yosef actually will become Shimon's son-in-law because Shimon is married to his sister, and it's a kind of a strange idea, but leave that for the moment. Let's go deeper. Let's try to understand what is going on with Dina. Is Dina to blame for what happened, for this whole incident with Shem? Certainly there are those commentators, and by the way, this was picked up by Christian commentators as well, that point to Dina as an example of what can happen if a woman is too forward, is too out there, as we would say, rather than maintaining her modesty and staying close to home. And they say, look, it even could cause a war. And we're not sure how many people, but let's say hundreds of people to be killed. But this is obviously not very politically correct in today's world, and may also be a kind of classic case of blaming the victim. So let's see if we cannot look at the life of Dina in a broader context with less criticism and somewhat more compassion. Two crucial events impact upon Dina. The first one is her birth. By tradition, Leah is pregnant and she is due to have another boy, number 7. So she judges the situation And she takes pity on Rachel, who took pity on her, of course, and allowed her to marry Yaakov. And she prays to have a girl because she understands that if she has another boy, then Rachel will have even less sons than Bilhah and Zilpah, the handmaidens, and that would be very humiliating. So she prays, and a miracle occurs, and the sex of the fetus is transformed from a boy into a girl. In some ways, you might almost say that Dina is the first transgender. It's very, we're getting very topical. So that's the beginning of Dina's life. The second incident that we read about, which is also quite familiar, is when Yaakov is about to meet up with Esav. So he assembles the entire family, and there the Torah lists the children and says, his 12 children, but we know that Dina is not mentioned. And so Rashi and other sources tell us, where is Dina? She is hidden. Yaakov hides her in a box because he is afraid that Esav will see her and want to marry her. For this, Yaakov is punished. What is the punishment? The story of Dina and Shechem. Now, the classic question, the obvious question, why should Yaakov be punished? He should be commended for saving his daughter from an evil, violent man like Esav. But you have to see the bigger picture here. And this is the commentaries fill in the blanks. There are 4 imahot, but only 3 avot, right? 4 matriarchs, 3 patriarchs. Who is the missing 4th av? Of course, that's Esav. True, he was a problem child, wild and out of control. But the solution, at least ideally, was not to ostracize and abandon him, but to find him the right woman. A woman who can make a mensch out of him. That is the power of a woman. Now, that woman was originally meant to be Leah, but it was not in the cards for her to marry Esav, and she cried and she begged and she pleaded not to marry him. And she didn't. She married, we know the story, she married Yaakov, but there was still a chance to rehabilitate Esav through Dina. She had the same genes as Leah. And that is why by both Leah and Dina, the Torah uses the expression vatetse Leah and vatetse Dina. Both went out, so to speak. And that's why it identifies Dina as Dina bat Leah. It says Yaakov, Dina bat Leah, and not bat Yaakov. She was very much like her mother. Ke'ima kabita. The daughter is like the mother. Both of them are what Rashi calls a yatzanit. It's a difficult word. Obviously, it comes from the word yetzeh, to go out. But I suggest that that does not mean they were too forward or immodest. Leah is the one who goes out in the story of the Dudaim. She meets Yaakov when he's coming back from the field and says, you will be spending the night in my tent. That's the outgoing of her. And that results actually ultimately in the birth of both Yisachar and Zevulun. And but the idea of being a yatzanit is not being too forward or too immodest, but suggesting that both Leah and Dina had the genetic ability to bring out the best in their man. Yatzanit meaning lahotzi, to bring out the best in their man, which is a special talent and power and strength and skill that women have. But Yaakov prevented that from happening. Probably, say Chazal, not because he wanted to shield Dina from Esav, but because he didn't want Esav to become the great person that Yitzchak believed that he could become. The result, some might say punishment, was the episode of Dina's kidnapping and rape. But even here, we would see, Chazal see the effect that Dina even had on Shechem, that some say she was actually changing him and taking him to a higher spiritual plane. The pasuk says that he loved her. He went from lusting her lusting after her to loving her, but still he had to be punished for her crime. So that was the ability, the talent, the strength that Dina also had. So let's analyze this for a moment. Dina was meant to be a boy, and she becomes a girl. She must have known that. She must have heard that story 100 times. And you don't think that messes a person up to ask, who am I? What was I meant to be? A delicate flower or maybe one of the boys, literally. And maybe that's why she wandered out of her safety zone and explored, as boys are wont to do, the take an adventure and go outside her normal environment. Or maybe she just didn't feel like she belonged in the family, that she was used as a way of making amends with Rachel, and that her life path was decided by others who chose to change her sex and make her something that she wasn't initially meant to be. Now, add to this her being taken and hidden in a box, literally forced into a box by Yaakov. That can't be pleasant, especially if it was done for ulterior motives. Again, what's happening here is an autocratic parent is controlling her life. So if you think about it, you try to analyze this whole situation, had she married Esav and reformed him so that he took his rightful place, she could have been one of the imahot. Instead, what happened? She is taken by Shechem, again, used and abused and controlled by a man, and she is humiliated and now cast out. Now she has to commit incest, and she has to carry forever that stigma of being that Canaanite woman. And we could imagine how people looked at her, what people thought of her, and this becomes the character of Dina. It's very, very tragic. And I want to suggest that through all of this, we have to look at the bigger person, look at the surrounding situation of what is happening to Dina. She is at least recorded as, the only girl. There's all kinds of midrashic comments that maybe there were other children that Yaakov had. It doesn't seem, in this confrontation with Esav, it doesn't seem that there are. It seems a little bit almost, miraculous that Yaakov has 12 sons, and doesn't have a whole collection of daughters. But I would suggest that if you want to be literal from the text, she's the only girl. And not only is she the only girl, she was meant to be a boy as well. And as we said before, had Leah not prayed, and this is where she gets her name Dina, that Leah kind of judged the situation in a positive way. And sometimes a judge has to be compassionate. And so Leah was being compassionate toward her sister, Rachel. There's also an opinion that Rachel is the one who prayed, but I think the majority opinion is that Leah is the one who prayed that this fetus inside her should become transformed from a boy into a girl. So Dina, in any sense, is really very much alone. She's surrounded completely by men. And this certainly has a major effect on her. And therefore, one of the opinions is that she needed to get away from all those men. So that's why the Pasuk says that Dina went out to the girls of Shechem, as we said. Shechem would see her and lure her away. But initially, she probably just wanted to be with other women. And as a result of that, she just is indicating that she's been suppressed and her life has been manipulated. Dina lives a tormented life. And I think that we're very quick to blame her and to say, yes, it's true, she was kidnapped, she was raped, but maybe that's her fault. Maybe she is the one who caused that to happen. She should have stayed in the house. I don't think that, even though we have this famous phrase that the glory of a woman is bifnim, is inward, I don't know that that's meant to be taken literally. That means a woman has to be locked up inside the house. I think it's more reasonable to suggest that a woman has these inner traits and the ability to influence those who come within her domain, specifically children, but not only, as opposed to saying a woman's place, is only in the home. And Dina is certainly someone who has to deal with all these different influences on her life. So I want to really kind of lead it to a happy ending, to a happy note. If we accept, and this too is, you have to factor in the midrashic comments because we don't see all of this in the text. But if we accept the midrash that Dina's daughter was indeed Osnat, who was also shunned because of her disgraceful father, right? She is the daughter of Dina and the result of this rape by Shechem. So she is also stigmatized, especially back in those days in that world. She's going to be completely stigmatized. So what happens to her? So she is also sent away, and she is shunned because of her disgraceful father. And this was certainly the rule of thumb with first women who became pregnant in outside of marriage, or also even against their will through rape, and also with those children. Right? Those of you who are familiar with this famous hotel in London, that's in Hendon, the Pillar, this was a former convent where girls were sent from, if I'm not mistaken, from the Denver and the Colorado area to be raised by the nuns away from their natural home where nobody knew them. And as you may have seen, there's been a few movies about this, some of them given away to other families because they were considered to be a source of embarrassment. And this is what happens to Osnat. So she is sent to Egypt, far away. But what happens to her is that she, according to the Midrash, she is adopted by Potiphar and Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife is never identified by name. She's just called Eshet Potiphar. And she is unable to have children. So she is adopted, but she is the daughter of Dina, this daughter of Dina and Shechem, and she marries Yosef. So the result of that is her genes will be passed down to her children. Who are her children with Yosef? Ephraim and Manasseh. And these are the two boys that we pray for our own children to emulate. Every Shabbat, when we ask that our sons should be like Ephraim and Manasseh, there are many, many reasons given why we've chosen Ephraim and Manasseh. But maybe now, after hearing the story, maybe we have a new reason to choose them as role models. Their grandmother suffered perhaps like no other. This is their grandmother is Dina. But in the end, her lineage will be shining examples of this ability to survive as Ephraim and Manasseh did in Egypt and remain faithful even in the most difficult of surroundings and circumstances. So when we say that you should be blessed like Ephraim and Manasseh, I think we're of course commenting on the fact that they were in an alien environment and separated from their whole family and their cousins and their grandfather from Yaakov. But at the end of the day, from Yaakov, their grandfather, but at the end of the day, they're also related to Dina. and who marries Yosef and who gives birth to Osnat and who marries Yosef and produces these children. And so there's a kind of connection and that somehow rehabilitates and somehow gives a certain honor and kavod to Dina after everything that happened to her. And I would just add that the name Dina remains one of the most beautiful names in Judaism. And we always say that the Jewish people, we vote in a sense with our feet. The actions that we do, this is something that ultimately you can tell if something is right and good. You see how the community reacts and what do the people of Israel do. And we see that Dina is a name that is very popular and very beautiful. And if it was going to reflect negativity, then I think we would steer away from it. The fact that we will name children Dina is already an indication that Dina is a very popular, is a very positive character. I want to I've lost my picture here for a moment. Let me try to go back on it. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can get back. I hope I won't lose you. One sec. Okay. So I've tried to give you a little bit of a larger background to who Dina was and is. A tragic figure, no doubt, and someone who really led a very, very sad life. But at the end of the day, when we examine everything that Dina accomplished and what she went through, I think we have to have a lot of compassion for her, and we have to look at her in a different light. And unfortunately, we see this. I don't want to get into too much of a contemporary critique about sexism, but here clearly, the people that we take as heroes, especially Yaakov, we see that sometimes even the greatest people can err. Had Dina been treated somewhat differently, she actually could have ended up being the fourth or being the fifth of the Imahot, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and Dina. It's not far-fetched, but it was not to be. But I feel that it's important to say a good word about Dina because it's very rarely do we hear that. But I think in the contemporary world of today, we understand that we have to have a lot of compassion for kids who come from troubled backgrounds and for women who maybe are put in a box and told literally and told you have to behave in a certain way and you have to live the legacy that we decide for you. That's what was done to Dina, and that's one of the great tragedies. So I will stop. I know people have written a lot of chats, but if you want to, I never can read that during the time. But let's take a quick look at the chats. Yes, seems unfair. Ace, the age, I can't go into the age difference between Esav and Dina, but clearly that was a suggestion that the two of them could actually have become known. Dina Arthur asked, Dina is the Canaanite woman because she was involved in this incident with this Canaanite in Shechem. And Canaan is always synonymous with sexual misbehavior. Somebody pointed out Osnat is also a name. Yeah, the book of the Red Tent, it doesn't necessarily, it takes a lot of liberties with this story, but as Yehudit says, you cannot use it as a Torah source by any means.
Can I just ask, something.
Yeah.
It was in my comment, and it just doesn't sit well with me. You said that Yaakov's punishment for hiding her was the rape of Dina. But it's just totally, but it was Dina that it was done to. She suffered more than anyone.
Yeah,
why should what Yaakov did to her be put on her?
Of course, that's a classic question, which is very difficult to answer. But what we're saying is it created a situation where, kind of Mida keneged Mida vis-a-vis Yaakov, right? That he denied her to Esav.
Yes,
and then
but
she
then he
became involved with an even worse person.
And but that is his punishment. Why was she punished?
Why was she punished? Because
doesn't sit well
there is a poked avon avot, right? Your parents moved to Afghanistan, and you're caught in living in a terrible place. You can ask God. I didn't choose to move to Afghanistan. That was something that was imposed upon me. There are lots of things that are imposed on us. Where we live, if our parents are successful or unsuccessful, if they have a good reputation or they don't, et cetera, et cetera. There are.
No, I understand she was. I understand she was a victim of the circumstances, and as you said, I just cannot accept that you said what happened. He was punished by her rape. Yeah, of course he was punished. It's a terrible thing.
Right.
But she suffered. She was the one who suffered.
Right. Okay.
How did the Azor Chazal explain that aspect of it?
Well, how do you explain that when you hear your parents are alcoholics and you become severely affected by that? Why? You didn't drink. You're not an alcoholic, but you're going to be affected by the decisions that's the only answer. You're affected by the decisions that other people make, including and especially your family. It's not always fair. Life is not always fair. Life is not always fair.
She was a sacrifice in a way to punish Yaakov.
We all are we all are to a certain extent. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Marita.
Hi. I want to make. I have a comment on that. Although it's only from my own opinion, not based on any readings. When we do something bad, we are punished, and as a parent, it is more painful for us when the punishment is going to our children. Like it's when we say it's better if we receive the punishment, but if the punishment is on our children, on our family, is more painful for us.
Yes, that's true. I accept that. But at the same time, every person is well. We have a statement in the Torah that says, Ish b'chet'o yumatud. Every person will be punished for their own sin, not for somebody else's sin. But yes, what you said is correct. But it's also true that those people who suffer, again, they're trapped into situations that are beyond their control. And, it's just a reality of life, as I said before. There are certain things that we didn't do, but yet we have to deal with the consequences of it. And therefore, the classic case is someone who's illegitimate, right? And the parents erred, and it is the child who carries the stigma of being illegitimate. And perhaps in all of these cases, the Torah is trying to say, be careful with what you do, especially on a sexual level, because other people will suffer as a result, and you will inflict the consequences of your sin upon them. And we see this, as I said, the most extreme example and the worst example is that of a mamzer, who for the rest of his or her life are trapped in this status, which they can never really overcome because of the sins of their parents. And it is what it is. Any other questions or comments? So I hope that we have maybe developed a little bit more of an insight into the character of Dina. She had all kinds of psychological pressures, I think, forced upon her and imposed upon her. And maybe she went a little bit off the path, but nevertheless, you have to have a lot of rahmanas for her because of the situation she was put in. And at the end of the day, that quality that she was given that wasn't really allowed to be expressed in a kosher manner, either with Esav or certainly in terms of being with Shem. And the rabbis do talk about that she may have had a certain spiritual effect on Shem and was kind of on the road to making something good out of him, although it obviously was not to be, that ultimately that same power would go through the generations and would reflect themselves in Ephraim and Manasseh that we hold to be role models for us to this very day. So thank you for tuning in, and we will, God willing, meet next week, same time, same place. Those of us in Israel, get ready for some rain, and let's hope it is Gishmei Bracha, rains of blessing. And thank you again, and thanks to Yossi. And if you've missed any of these shiurim, again, you can go to BKOA YouTube, or you can be in touch with me. I'll be glad to send you the recordings of them. Stay well, stay healthy. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
See you again soon.
Thank you.